Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Jazz obviously had a huge influence on the 1920s.
No, it didn't.
Yes, it did.
No, it didn't.
Yes, it did.
No.
Yes,
Jazz is in
I'll
like
prove
the
it.
1910s.
I'll prove it. I have a video clip.
Fine.
Watch this.
The Cotton Club opened in 1923 in New York City. It had a whites-only policy, and the audience included wealthy and well-off people. However, the staff were African Americans. Some of the most widely known jazz performers played there, including Duke Ellington. Ellington was the head of the orchestra there from 1927 to 1930 and came back to play at the club for short stays later on in the 20s. Ellington's orchestra and the Cotton Club gained national notoriety by weekly broadcasts on radio stations, some of which were released on albums. The Apollo Theater was created to provide live entertainment, including jazz and jazz dancing. It was originally built in New York City in 1923 and named Little Apollo, but then it merged with the New Burlesque Theater in 1927 to become the Apollo Theater. The Savoy Ballroom opened on March 12, 1926 in Harlem, New York, and was considered a jazz club for the general public, both black and white. It was one of the first racially integrated public areas in the country. There were many dance fads that the ballroom helped launch, including the Lindy Hop and the Flying Charleston, both of which were jazz dances that were based on jazz music. With different clubs offering jazz music to a wide variety of people, jazz was able to become widely known and popular. It was also able to make New York a main center of jazz. Everyone became affected by this type of music.
In 1901, a legend was born. This legend was Louis Armstrong. Throughout his life, he defined what it was to play jazz. Armstrong came from a poor family in New Orleans and was sent to a reform school at the age of 12. It was there that he first learned to play the cornet. After leaving the school, Armstrong didn't have an instrument to play, yet continued to listen to current bands. One of his favorite artists was King Oliver, who acted as a father to him. Oliver was the one to give him his first real cornet and teach him to play. In 1922, he joined Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, which played in New York. In 1925, he joined Fletcher Henderson's orchestra, which also played in New York. In 1925, Armstrong recorded his first Hot 5 record, the first to record under his own name. Although Armstrong's Hot 5 never was heard live, they continued to record until 1928. Joe King Oliver created the style of jazz known as hot jazz. This style was comprised of collective improvisation rather than solos. King was well known for using objects such as cups, bottles, derbies, and mutes in order to create a wide variety of sounds. In 1922, he started Oliver's Creole Jazz Band in Chicago, and later moved it to New York City. Through his creation of this band, Oliver introduced the styles of his student Louis Armstrong. However, this band soon fell apart, and Oliver went on to taking over Dave Payton's band and renaming it the Dixie Syncopators. Once he moved this band to New York City, everything seemed to go down from there. He ended up turning down a regular gig at the Cotton Club, which brought instantaneous fame to Ellington. Duke Ellington was born in 1899. He began his professional career in music in Washington, D.C. in 1917. Not only was Ellington a musician, but he was considered to be a composer and arranger as well. Later on, his talent led him to become part of the house band at the Cotton Club in New York City. His time at the Cotton Club led to radio broadcasts that increased his popularity in New York, as well as throughout the entire country. After the 1920s, Duke Ellington's style was still seen. His musical influence led to artists adapting his composition style to create their own songs.
This new type of music showed the more carefree nature of American society. Its musical change into new rhythms and beats reflected the social changes surrounding the 1920s. It was an era of changes. Jazz and poetry merged with each other to create a new form of poetry as well, called jazz poetry. This integration showed that jazz music became part of something more than just a style of music, and instead affected other cultural aspects of American society. Jazz also created new opportunities for people of both race and sex. Although at first blacks playing jazz were still seen as low, jazz eventually gained respect as an African American art form. With this increasing respectability, blacks started to fight for their equality and protest unfair treatment. The 1920s jazz music also gave women the motivation to go out of their boundary and start going into a rebellious stage. They were able to get jobs in the music industry as dancers to jazz music or performers. The first Broadway musical, Showboat, opened in 1927 and was motivated by jazz music. Jazz led to jazz dancing, which required changes in fashion. The more active movements needed more appropriate clothing, since the long skirts and old-fashioned styles were not suitable for this new type of dance to jazz music. As much as I hate to admit it, I guess you're right.
Told ya.
Jazz did have a really big influence on New York. I mean, especially with those musicians and all the
clubs and
Cotton Club, the Apollo, the Savoy, the Ballroom,
all that stuff.
Fashion.
So you believe me now?
Yes, I believe you.
Okay, my job is done here.